Right, we're going to get going again for the afternoon session. Sorry, I've been giving instructions about where to stand when you're speaking, and then I've completely done the opposite. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I think it's very delicious. Now that we're all fully charged again, we're going to hear from John, who's going to tell us all about the Jisc project, the Research Data Management Shared Service, and how that can help us all in working more efficiently, effectively, and better, we hope. So, I won't keep you hanging. John, over to you.
Right, it's a very mixed audience. Some of you will kind of be very familiar with the project, and some not. So, apologies if you've seen some of this before, but yeah, there's some new stuff in here. In here too. Sorry, just get more water. Big thanks to DPC to kind of organising this and helping kind of kickstart our year and get us thinking about some kind of new collaborations and things like that that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. But first off, some of you might or might not know who Jisc are. So basically, we're the kind of sort of national kind of not-for-profit sort of IT support for kind of UK higher further education. We provide kind of IT solutions and negotiate contracts with IT vendors. And what we're doing here is kind of like developing and operating digital kind of shared infrastructures. We also provide kind of some of the softer stuff, advice and guidance and kind of and things like that for kind of universities, colleges and learning providers. Everyone's got a vision and a mission, but yeah, kind of we want to make the kind of UK the most digitally advanced education and research nation in the world. Our mission basically is to kind of be at the forefront of international practice and just basically exploit whatever we can in terms of digital to make that happen. So where I come from is our research and development arm of Jisc called Digital Futures. So kind of our main goal is to kind of develop kind of new national shared technology services. And we want to kind of collaborate with everyone and anyone across the sector in the UK and outside. But yeah, we are a UK body with a kind of technology focus, and we have a kind of consultative process called co-design, which is basically asking you guys what you want, you tell us, and we'll see if we can do it. So that's the kind of gist of kind of like what we do in kind of R&D. Oh, Paul, what's going on here? Good. So, we've got our R&D hungry caterpillar. So yeah, kind of what we do is we start out looking at kind of horizon scanning, kind of looking out and seeing what's around, what's out there. Explore these any ideas to see if we can kind of work with them, they're sort of feasible and desirable. Then we look at kind of developing kind of prototypes and services, which kind of go into kind of like alpha stage and then beta, more robust services. Then once we've kind of got that bit done and dusted, we deliver the service to the community, enhance it, carry on with the enhancements, and then, you know, if needs be, we shut it down. But at the moment, we are basically here with RDSS. So, and you'll see kind of where we are throughout the presentation. So, in Digital Futures, we oh God, that doesn't come out very well. We have three main strands of work. So, we have digital capability, which is the kind of sort of softer end, as I mentioned, sort of information, advice, and guidance. Learning analytics, using digital technology to improve the student experience, and kind of looking at all sorts of stuff like, I don't know, kind of analysing kind of sort of retention periods and student behaviours, and we're getting smart around kind of looking at kind of how people kind of like behave in lectures and things like that. That's kind of a project that's about a year ahead of ours, and so it's a lot more mature, and we've been learning from them a lot. And then there's us, Research Data Shared Service, and there's some other things kind of hanging off this. So we have research data usage metrics. Everyone likes to know what's going on, likes their reports and things like that. They also like to know when data's being used, and is it a Chinese bot that's downloading your data set or viewing your file or something like that? So we're working on solutions to kind of allow that to happen as well. And that also helps with the compliance agenda. So people have mentioned the EPSRC sort of policy earlier. We need these metrics because EPSRC have said if someone uses your data, then you have to keep that data and make it available from 10 years since date of last access. So that gives you a kind of ticking clock. And yeah, it means that, yeah, 9 years from now, someone could download it. Then you've got to keep it for another 10 years. So that's why we're very much focused on digital preservation within this project. We've also got something called equipment.data. That's basically a kind of aggregation of equipment used in research. So if you've got a project that needs, I don't know, a spectrometer, your university doesn't have it, you can kind of search the registry, see if anyone down the road's got one, see if they'll let you use it, that kind of thing. So yeah, we want to kind of like help kind of sort of sharing across there, so people, can be more efficient and kind of not waste money. So yeah, one thing I wanted to mention was discovery. So some of you in the room would have been involved in our research data discovery service. So this is a kind of aggregation of basically what you envisage to be an aggregation of kind of research data sets in the UK. It includes the national data centres, like STFC earlier, as well as some kind of pilot universities. Unfortunately, due to kind of dev effort, this is on hold for now. It'll probably kick off again in a few months' time. But yeah, we want to put this on top of the kind of research data shared service and national data centres and other infrastructure, so people can get a whole view of what's going on in the UK for research data. You can get more information about it from the link there. All these slides will be available as well. So, who we are personally, kind of in the RDSS team, and after this week needs updating big time as well. We've got our project's SRO and Andy McGregor. Under him, I've been given apparently the grand title of product director, basically we've got our team of absolutely amazing people working on RDSS. So Dom Fripp, he's our repository product manager. He's managing our kind of Samvera development. You're going to be hearing from him on a video later on. We've got Paul in the room. He's very much focused on preservation and business case. We've got our pilot liaison. Daniela deals with our kind of universities that are working with us directly and co-developing the project with us. And then we've got Tamsin Berland, who's looking after the wider HEI community in the UK, and also is going to be taking on more of the kind of looking at reporting roles and stuff like that. Then we also have kind of Chris Brown, who's doing some strategic work with us and also looks after the discovery service. We've got Caroline Ingram and Tom Davey over there, kind of looking at kind of various aspects of kind of user experience and information advice and guidance. And then we're supported by a whole host of other folks. So we've got a lot of people from Glasgow, from Digerati in the room. They're basically the kind of brains behind the operation. And Alan McKenzie's our tech architect. Christine McDonald, who works closely with Alan, looks after our tech team. And then we've got our kind of project management consultants. And then the rest of Jisc as well. Everyone's involved. We're doing a lot of internal collaboration as well as kind of external. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We're working with all of these universities. So when we went out to consultation, what we wanted to do was basically kind of get as many use cases and kind of people testing the systems from a diverse range of institutions as possible. So we've got the big research intensive guys like University of Cambridge, Imperial College, and then small and specialist folks like Royal College of Music, St George's Hospital Medical School, and kind of everyone in between as well. And as we found out, basically kind of the funding is there for research data, but everyone's got preservation problems for everything, basically, digital objects. So when we go for meetings at these places, we kind of always meet new people who say, oh, we've got this film and TV studio, can we use your systems for that? So yeah, there's a lot of that going on at the moment as well. So, okay. So yeah, why we're doing this, there isn't a single solution that kind of is easily available, meets everything, all the requirements for universities to manage research data, digital objects, records, and archives. And we've got a bit of a problem. So the preservation systems that currently exist have been set up for libraries, museums, archives, not science. So this is some research done by Jenny Mitcham from York University, who kind of looked at their data sets up at York. They found out of about 3,700 data sets, only 37% of those data sets were identified using the systems that everyone uses and our current ones. So that's like a 40% gap, basically. And we need to solve that. I'm going to National Archives, who kind of run this registry, tomorrow to talk to them about it. So yeah, we'll see how we get on there. So yeah, we're doing a lot of R&D work around kind of this type of thing, and making the systems that already exist and that people are already using applicable to kind of scientific data. But when we're doing this, we're trying not to forget about the researchers. So kind of early on in the project, we carried out something called a data asset framework. And what we found in that, we had kind of a response of about 1,000 researchers to the survey. We found that 75% of respondents looked to their kind of institution to preserve their data. But then, only 16% of those are currently accessing RDM services within the institution. So there's a little bit of a gap going on. So we're doing things like kind of promoting kind of research data champions and evangelists and things like that. But yeah, kind of there's a lot of stuff like this. Some little qualitative quotes from the survey. So yeah, kind of support is woeful in the university. Long-term archiving is required. Stuff's rotting on CDs and hard drives. Please individualise the support. Workshops aren't very helpful. Emails of information aren't very helpful. Brochures aren't very helpful. Posters aren't very helpful. I don't know what this person wants. But yeah. And then I've been in this position myself. When I was doing my MSc, I had to spend my own money on managing my research data. So yeah, this researcher spends basically out of their own pocket about £1,000 a year on kind of buying his own cloud services, and that's really not a good thing to be doing. So yeah, I feel sorry for him, and I feel his pain because I've done it myself. But yeah, kind of like across the sector, it's very diverse. No one's the same. There's pockets of good disciplinary practice where kind of we're served by kind of existing disciplinary or institutional infrastructure like STFC, UK Data Service, all the good national stuff that's going on. And there's kind of pockets of preservation expertise. So kind of Masood's team up in Lancaster are kind of looking really, really hard, doing really good work around assessing our preservation systems. But yeah, kind of generally, kind of as a kind of a whole piece, most institutions are kind of at the start of implementing systems of practice. So I think that's probably kind of a fair thing to say. Mentioned researcher engagement is key. And yeah, the desired configuration of research systems varies between institutions. There's an ecosystem out there, and what we're doing is basically trying to make all of that stuff talk to each other. Large institutions, and we're finding small institutions as well, have lots of locally managed active data where there's a big, big storage need. So we need to find storage solutions that keep the costs down there. We're finding that often the case has been made for RDM, but institutions have to make the case internally for kind of RDSS, and we're working up, and Paul is working up business models, and we'll get pricing out in kind of late spring for people to kind of to look at to become part of the service as well. So kind of functional solution about what we're doing. So basically we are creating a kind of repository offer, which does standard repository functions, deposits, describes, stores the data, publishes it. That talks to preservation systems, so Matthew Addis's team and Artifactual Systems in Canada, looking at Archivematica, also Preservica there. In the repository space, we have Samvera, Hydra that Neil mentioned earlier, and Figshare. And then the reporting system is being developed by Masood's team up in Lancaster. Then we have kind of sort of, where's storage? Yeah, storage stuff. Claire, Kirsty, you're not mentioned on this yet. You will be. So Data Vault is part of this secure managed storage part. And it's all kind of API driven, shared standards-based technology. And yeah, we want to kind of give a lot of advice and best practice and integrate with kind of the rest of the researching ecosystem where possible. This is an old diagram which kind of illustrates a lot better. I'll skip over this. You can kind of have a look and compare and contrast. Basically, this was when the project was more complicated than it is now. So simplified workflow about kind of what we're doing. So yeah, basically what we want is kind of researcher deposits their data. When that happens, a message gets sent to our brains of the system, which then says, okay, I need to put this data or paper or record or whatever digital object it is into the right preservation service, and I need to tell our reporting service all about it, how much it's costing, possibly what impact it's having, does it have a data management plan, stuff like that. That's all the stuff we're kind of thinking about. Then basically we aggregate all of that and present that out to the world, and yeah, kind of other people that aren't involved, we're happy for them to plug into that as well. And then we're happy for people to use their own storage to kind of back up their data, if that will keep the cost down as well. So if anyone's really interested in metadata, we have this data model, which this is just the alpha, the beta one. Yeah, it's much, much bigger. You can go on GitHub and view that for anyone that's kind of that way inclined. We're doing a lot of work with the Samvera community, with our suppliers in the preservation community to kind of join all of this up and automate as much of this stuff as possible. But the data model is basically the foundation of what we're doing in terms of getting things talking to each other. So it records kind of events that happen. It records the kind of metadata about the data and about the objects, and then it kind of sends all that through to the all the different systems, the discovery, the preservation, and kind of makes everything happen at the touch of a button. So we're obviously a DPC event, so kind of focused on preservation. So what we're doing in preservation, we've got our core systems that we were working with. So I mentioned, as mentioned, Preservica, and then Archivematica, which is a kind of sort of joint venture between Archivem and Artifactual Systems in Canada. We're doing sort of preservation R&D development with Kirsty's team doing Data Vault, also working with the Open Preservation Foundation on kind of file format registries and things like that. Records and archives, obviously Valerie's presentation earlier, and we're also doing the same thing, but with kind of focusing on Archivematica. Sorry, Archivem's offer perpetual at Westminster for Archivematica. And then we've got a lot of kind of work going on about kind of, building community, information advice and guidance. So today, DPC. And also we're kicking off a bit of work around what we're going to do with software as well. Because with research, it isn't just the data, it isn't just the paper. It's the code, it's the metadata. You've got to kind of focus on the kind of how you can actually reproduce results and allow people to actually use the resources that you give them. So we're working with the Software Sustainability Institute via Neil Chew in Edinburgh. Yeah, there'll be kind of a similar event probably up here or near here soon. But yeah, so watch this space on that one. But yeah, kind of where we're at, what we're delivering. So we had this kind of alpha minimum viable product, which is done, and it's basically getting our repository systems to talk to our preservation systems without too much faffing around, and without people kind of having to go into kind of desktop applications and kind of go through some pain. So a lot of work has been put into kind of making this happen. But yeah, kind of you can see the kind of little complexity we've got with just 16 now pilot institutions. So we've got 5 product clusters, but it should be 6 really, of kind of different combinations of the systems, and people testing out different stuff, and there's different expertise across the pilots in the different systems. But yeah, I'll let you look at that kind of at your own time. I'll take forever to kind of go into all of that. But yeah, preservation challenges. So Matthew, thanks for this. So automated preservation workflow. What we want is to make preservation easy. We don't want researchers to know about it. So when they deposit stuff into a repository or a CRIS system or records management system or something like that, it should just get fired off to the preservation system, and a workflow should be kicked off. This is ideal for those, and it's a very common problem, that have a lack of resources in terms of staff, time, budget to do a comprehensive job of preserving all their data sets. Then there are people that have the skills and have the time and have the resources, and they want to get more involved. And we like those people because we can basically get their knowledge and share it with others. I'll tell you about another project that we're doing in RDSS to make that happen. But with the automated workflow, again, thanks Matthew for the diagram. Basically, kind of the researcher puts an object into the repository. The research manager gets notified. They say, yeah, that's fine. Then it goes straight to the preservation system, and then whatever data storage platform that we choose to put it in. Currently in alpha, we're using AWS, and we will be using an outfit called UK Cloud in the future, but we're open to any offers. If anyone's got any cheap storage, that would be very, very nice. But yeah, we also kind of obviously integrate with the kind of identifier systems like DataSite, ORCID, stuff like that. So one of the things that we are looking at in terms of preservation is user experience. These are really, really small samples, and we're going to grow these, but the people that did them took quite a bit of time to carry out the test with our UX consultants. And we didn't get great feedback. So we've got a lot to do in terms of improving the UX, especially around Samvera and the preservation systems. So as you can see, people didn't rate the kind of automated transfer. Sorry, forget. People didn't rate the automated transfer that well. Nextcloud is a desktop app that Archivum used to bring data into Archivematica. People didn't really like that. But the kind of automated Samvera and Archivematica automated workflow came out really well. Well, for us, anyway. Right. So, again, kind of SIP Creator is basically the kind of desktop app to get things into Preservica, if people are familiar with that system. People don't like desktop apps, really don't like desktop apps. Figshare and Preservica automated. I can't really understand this one, but yeah, again, there's no desktop app involved there. But yeah, I think it was a bit of faffing around in Preservica that folks were doing. And then kind of, Nextcloud, again, desktop app, people didn't like. And again, kind of, Samvera and Archivematica, yeah. So, Matthew, there's a bit of work to do. So yeah, so we have Tom Davey who's in the room, who's our kind of UX expert, and he's going to be helping us out on kind of getting all this stuff sorted as well. So yeah, you know the scale of the challenge. So it's not all bad news though, and we have a video that Paul's going to show from my colleague Dom Fripp, who does a really good job of underselling our service. So yeah, kind of this is basically kind of showing a automated transfer that this was for a webinar that happened last week. It's showing an automated transfer between our repository Samvera and the Preservica preservation system, and we're going to be doing.
I will just gloss over this now because this isn't the kind of main.
Do you want to start again, Paul? Sorry.
We've got some.
We're going to be doing demos for all the other stuff that we're doing as well, and that includes interoperability
well,
with the pure system too.
So this is a demonstration of an end-to-end integration. So this is primarily what the alpha's trying to be try to achieve. So we've got Samvera, a depositor, depositing research data into Samvera. Here I've created a record, I've pre-populated it. I will just gloss over this now because this isn't the kind of main thing, but we've got a selection of files here, some images, some spreadsheets, some video as well, just to show you there's a selection in there. Description, the form for the data, the metadata that's required for the data set is based on the canonical data model that underpins the research data shared service. One of the things that we've been working on the most at the minute in terms of Samvera is to make sure that we have this synchronization with the canonical data model, and to make sure that once we've got that, then we know that we can integrate further with other systems and software that are kind of working on this project. So some of the main stuff is here, like title, creators, rights and licenses. There's additional information down here, keywords, versioning, dates, all of which kind of have done to appropriate standards, and that's all in the canonical data model. We're not using DOIs at present, but of course DOIs would be minted within Samvera based on an institution's DOI minting deal with DataSite. So I've selected all of this. As you can see, we're trying to make the metadata available extensive, kind of common. I would say this is aspirational to a degree, but we want it in there. Typically data sets don't have all of this metadata yet, but we want to make sure that with Samvera that we have these options. It's particularly important when we're talking about related work here. We're trying to build this kind of vision of these sets of interrelated digital objects that comprise research, and therefore to move seamlessly between interlinked papers, data sets, software, and any other pieces that are relevant to a particular piece of research is really important. So having the ability to specify this is key. As you can see on the right hand side, we've got a small checklist here, which in Samvera just lets you know that you've done all that you need to do as a depositor. I'm going to make this public. You can see a few other choices down here, some of which can be just kept restricted to the institution itself. Embargoes can be set depending on requirements for that particular data that supports papers that are themselves embargoed, and some other options. All of this are things that we're looking at. This is functionality that's come from the Willow version. This is programmable within the Samvera stack, so it's underpinned by HireX, and we're looking to make sure that what we can do is change this based on what the users actually need it to do. But for now, we're just going to say save, and then so this is we're in a depositor mode at the minute. So that's what the researcher sees, and that's all they know is that they've done their bit, and then basically it will go to an admin person. So I'm just going to log in as an admin. See if it's remembered the right password. Nope, that's fine now.
There's lots of passwords.
So I've done this a few times. I've memorized the passwords now. So I won't go into this in its entirety. I just want to show you the kind of the the submission workflow, but you can see the admin has a lot of a much richer dashboard. We're looking at some metrics here. You can set up workflows, change the content within Samvera here as well. So people with admin privileges will be able to really customize the experience for users. All of the stuff that has to happen under the bonnet, we'll obviously take forward into a development roadmap as we go. For now, we're going to do review submissions, and we can see here that we've got something pending review, and this is what we posted. So an admin person will look through that work, make sure everything there that's needed to be. I'm going to, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to say that that's perfect. And here the admin has some control over the relationship between the data set and the depositor. So if it's not up to standards, it can be sent back to the depositor and changes can be requested. However, I'm going to approve this for the sake of argument. Thinking about it. Okay, so this has been updated now. So we can just see that that's been approved. So that's deposited, and we're just going to go over to. You might see on some of this there are some issues with kind of like the ranking of dates and stuff. These are all bugs that we've detected already, and we've got them into a defects board, and we're dealing with those as we go. So I'm just going to flick over. Took its time, although interestingly, Preservica did do its job quick. It just didn't show up very fast. So that's what we got here. So we're looking in Preservica at the minute, just to kind of show you what we just did. So we looked at. So we've got a completed ingest here, which happened at 3:17. So 8 files. So here you can see that the files have moved. Well, I'll show you what the files are, but this is Preservica running all of its checks on this pool. I'm sure you're very familiar with all of this. So this is just showing Preservica telling us that it's done what it's done, that it's received data, and it's done all the checks that have been set up on it. So what that actually looks like is, these are the files that we put in basically. So. And that did happen automatically, and it did happen quickly. It's just, for some reason, it's just taken time to actually show up today. But according to all of the time stamps, it happened promptly. So it's not very exciting to look at an end-to-end integration, I admit, but it's just important to show you that all the hard work that's been going on is to actually show something very simple and actually not very exciting, which is stuff happening automatically.
I need a word with Dom. Yeah, because what we're doing now is trying to take the pain away from the researcher. So what the researcher does is stick something into the repository, goes straight into the preservation system. The preservation system kicks off and does its stuff. So, but yeah, we've got other demos coming soon. So yeah, kind of all the other configurations, and yeah, we've kind of done a sort of pure to preservation systems test instance as well. So that'll be interesting. One thing to note is yeah, kind of Neil at LSE mentioned that they had one dev working on Samvera. We've got 6 full-time guys working very quickly on it right now. That's growing to 7 this week. So yeah, expect this to happen fast as well. So yeah, so yeah, kind of more on the UX, like kind of again. For the testers, when they're kind of looking at this kind of automated transfer between Willow's now Samvera, between Samvera and Archivematica, most people spent most time filling in the form on Willow, and yeah, not a lot of time in the preservation system, which is a good thing. Strangely, again, I need to figure out what's gone on here. In Figshare, they've got very nice UX on the front, so it takes them less time to fill in the metadata, but they spend a lot of time poking around in Preservica. I don't know. This is very, very new. We only got this report this week, so but yeah, just to show some of the kind of challenges and things that we're working on with our user experience here. And again, basically, Preservica's desktop app, people spent ages with it. People don't like desktop apps. So yeah, spent ages actually getting the data in and not a lot of time in the system. So yeah, to solve some of this stuff, we've got a joint collaboration between our preservation suppliers, Archivum, Artifactual, Preservica. Paul's leading on this project, and basically it's kind of sharing good practice recipes of kind of who does what and why in terms of preservation. It's a point-to-point exchange of information. It works on the kind of the data model and all the APIs, and yeah, kind of it's basically a reference registry for kind of who's doing kind of what in preservation. The potential to broaden this out globally beyond RDSS. We're going to prototype it in RDSS, but it could be that anyone in the world can submit to this and show what people are doing. So say if someone trusts that Cambridge University is doing right, they can nick all their preservation policies and plans and put them into their own systems. That's the end goal of this, basically. But yeah, we're working on a proof of concept on that now. This little diagram of kind of how it works. Don't think we need to go into too much detail, but yeah, basically kind of it's APIs into the kind of main registry from both the systems, and yeah, kind of maps to the data models within kind of both the systems and the RDSS data model as well. So, but yeah, kind of where we are in the project, kind of where we are now in January. We got our business case approved, which is a good thing. So it meant that the Jisc management were happy with what we've done. We've got to go back again and show them what we've done that should be in March, to be honest with you. And then we can basically say, okay, this is what we need to do in terms of pricing and stuff to make this a production service. So that's when the pricing will come out. And then we're looking to kind of transition this into a production service from summer onwards so that people can use. But what we're offering when we go out to the community is pick and mix. So you can have kind of the end-to-end service, like the whole thing, the repository, preservation, reporting. You can have just the repository if you want it, just the preservation system if you want it. So if you've got like an ePrints repository or a records management system and you want to plug it in, you can do that. You can plug it into kind of Archivematica or Preservica. So that's the way that kind of the architecture has been designed to allow this kind of ecosystem to kind of exist and for everyone to kind of all the systems to hopefully talk to each other. And to do that, this is all kind of very much kind of on the kind of commercials. We're going to definitely be launching kind of our open source beta repository. Possibly have the Figshare in there as well. We're going to be having the two preservation systems, the reporting functionality that Masood's team's working on. But we want to complement this. One of the things that I mentioned before was that we basically do kind of sector negotiations. So we want to complement this with anyone else that wants to get involved and wants to plug into our system that is compliant with our standards. So to get on this framework, you've got to be able to kind of meet the requirements of the data model and the messaging layer. And yeah, then universities or others can go and kind of basically pick your product and plug into the system. So hopefully that will all kind of work out. This is, again, still early days thinking, but yeah, there'll be more news on that soon. More integrations that we're doing. I won't go into them. I know I'm overrunning by a lot. This is what we're doing with our pilots. So they get the repository preservation system, training support guidance, the event-based stuff that you've just seen. We're working on flexible metadata schemes for different content types, focusing big time on open access by July to make an open access compliant repository, and then deal for journal articles, and then deal with stuff like theses and things like that as well. And yeah, kind of storage, the discovery work on problematic kind of issues around kind of records management systems and publication repositories, and then more problematic areas around. I'm not calling it big data because I don't like the term, but large data, and anything that can be kind of stuff that's too big to kind of go over HTTP or too big to go over the network. So yeah, kind of, and also sensitive stuff. So we've got issues around GDPR with that one as well. Definition of done, kind of for alpha, we've kind of done it. To be honest with you, you can have a look at that. It was kind of there in the demo. but yeah, kind of more UX work obviously is very needed. We're starting work on security and trusted repository and more information, advice and guidance. Yeah, then GDPR. This is unfortunately Paul's headache. Basically, yeah, we're working on the paperwork for kind of GDPR compliance. There will be kind of GDPR for Research Data Workshop, and yeah, we're going to be working towards kind of ISO 27001. Our security team, who have done it for some other services, say it'll be 6 months. I'm not sure about that, because you said Greenfield's easier. We're retrofitting and joining up all sorts, so we'll see. But yeah. Yeah, post-beta developments, ability to store sensitive data. We don't want anything sensitive going in before we've got the ISOs, and we know that we're properly secure because we don't end up in the papers. We have a service called SafeShare, which allows end-to-end encryption between universities and data centers and things like that, so we're going to integrate with that service. We're working on a tiered storage service as well, so we're working on our own storage offer in our data centers in Slough and in Leeds. Then, yeah, kind of integrations with kind of additional third-party integrators, so the people like the Chris Systems. We want to work with DPC and not DPC, sorry, DCC on DMP Online, and I need to have a conversation with those guys about how we can do that. And then kind of, yeah, integrations with kind of active data storage, so kind of, yeah, the stuff that researchers care about, their day-to-day work. So, yeah, kind of that's all kept in kind of institutional storage areas, and sort of, yeah, kind of things like Dropbox and Box and, you know, kind of their laptops and stuff like that. So, yeah. But yeah, I'm nearly done. Collaborations, as you can see, we're working with a lot of people. If you go into the RDSSS GitHub repo, I think there's about 60 developers in there at the moment, and there's going to be some more soon. But yeah, kind of what we're seeing is data as like universal language of research. We want to do global collaborations as well. So yeah, we're talking with Figshare about potential collaborations in Africa. So yeah, they don't have the local budgets to do that, so we need to find ways to kind of fit those collaborations in. So some of the stuff that we've got in the works, yeah, as I mentioned, Figshare, digital science, looking at kind of obviously the work that we're doing now, but also in Africa. The Samvera community, so we're working with kind of Neil and Chris Orr from Hull and many others in Samvera Europe user group, and we want to get more involved internationally, and especially in the States around that. Working with our consultants Digerati, who yeah, basically kind of built RDSS for us, and kind of do more integration with ORCID, and that affects kind of the Samvera kind of ORCID integration there. We have an open science agreement with Elsevier that we are kind of progressing, but we've kind of jumped the gun a little bit and done a little bit of a prototype about how we might do that we need to go and sit down with them and show them. Unfortunately, I can't show you that today. I need to get permission from various people to kind of be able to do that. Then we want to look at HPC, and this fits in with the presentation from STFC earlier. So yeah, we're talking with the people from the Square Kilometre Array down in Australia about kind of what they're doing with their data. Also linking up with Imperial College, who are doing kind of similar stuff as well, and seeing kind of like, yeah, basically pick their brains, get advice about what we can do for large data, or large and interesting data, as someone called it last night. And then, yeah, European stuff. We've got an open air bid in to enhance Samvera. We want to do more kind of work to integrate DMP Online with Digital Creation Center, California Digital Library, and we're always open to suggestions. That's tip of the iceberg, to be honest with you. There's loads of other stuff as well. So it isn't just me, there's a whole team of us. Some of us in the room here today, some not. So kind of, yeah, myself, Dom did the video presentation, Paul sat over there. Tom Davey is our UX guy, and Alan McKenzie, who unfortunately isn't here today, but his colleagues from Digerati are. He's our kind of chief architect on it. So if you've got any questions, fire away. So, and I'm really sorry for overrunning. There's a lot of stuff there. It's
Thanks, John. We'll have time for more detailed
There's a lot of
questions because I know there's a lot to go at there and a lot to think about. So if it's all right, after the next session, we'll get you all back together and have a bit of a deeper dive into all of that.
brilliant. Yeah, sorry, and if there's any jargon and anyone didn't understand, then please feel free to ask me.
A lot of it. Okay, we're going to have a brief interlude just while Masood switches over his laptop. So talk amongst yourselves. set. We went back to plan A in the end. It's always technology, isn't it? Hello, easy file access. Okay, so Masood's going to talk to us a bit about being one of the RDSS pilot institutions and how that's working out for you. But also some of the other approaches and tools and things that they're developing alongside that to help with research data management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
of course,
you
so
very much
I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Masood.
Thank you. Apologies about the technology issues. No matter how hard you think and how much effort you put in to make it simple, it still doesn't work. So maybe there is a lesson in there that simplest things are the hardest to achieve, actually. I'm also very aware of the fact that I'm the last person here talking today. So all the exciting and useful stuff has already been said. So I'm hoping I won't bore you, but what I'll do is I'll give you a bit of a journey of Lancaster University and how we went through different phases of RDM, what we thought would work at one time, what it actually ended up in, how that helped us shape our thinking and what we are doing now. And hopefully at the end, I'll give a bit of a reflection on where we want to go forward. Now, we are slightly different to some of the other presentations that you might have heard about because of the way we are structured, and I'll give you a bit of explanation of that. So I won't talk too much about what Lancaster University is, but I'm very proud of these, so I will mention these. We've just been rated as the Times and the Sunday Times University of the Year for 2018. We got a TEF Gold in 2017, and over 100 countries are represented on our tiny little campus. It's not that tiny, it's over 500 acres now. And it's a beautiful location. If you've never been there before, definitely highly recommend you come along, and I'll be very happy to host you there. Now, one of the things that I'm very keen on is before you do anything, you need to know what is it or what's the vision behind it. And we did a lot of work on that because introducing an RDM service is easy in a way. The question is, why are we doing it? And actually, what does it bring to the end researchers? And that was one thing that we were really keen to think about. And when we were composing the library's vision for 2020, we specifically, if you notice in this particular wording, there would be no wording about how we will support researchers. I think we are shifting the trend now. We don't want to support researchers anymore. We want to work with them. And actually, in this scenario, we are the subject level experts, and we want to give them developmental opportunities to work with us in this domain. And the point here is that we'll work with them. We'll be partners in creating collaborative environments. We are not talking about we'll support you in your research data endeavor or open access endeavor or anything like that. So that's the very essence of where we are coming from. When this was translated into my team, which we are quite collegial team, one of the interesting things in my team is that we are both digital and research combined together. And that's not a very common kind of along many other institutions. And what it does is it allows us to mix and mash both of those things very well together. And this is actually a small segment of the kind of behaviors and why we wrote for each other. And we said we definitely want to enhance the reach, impact, and potential of digital and research. But we also want to inspire moments of optimism and innovation and excellence. We are no longer a library who will just say, yeah, we'll support you. We're a library who are going to go and actually create new things with you. We'll create a value for our end users. I think that's so important that what we do is not really just this is why it's been mandated, therefore you have to do it, but actually what value it brings back to you. And also to be partners in digital research, and there's a lot of work that we're putting in that now at this time. Right, so that was my kind of introduction to what Lancaster is, what the library vision is, and what my team is looking at. Now, what I'll actually talk about going forward is a bit of a journey, as I mentioned before. So we'll start a bit from the policy, then I'll talk a bit about the advocacy, then I'll talk about all the things that we've learned from that advocacy. Then we'll move on to a bit of tools and why we are really excited about some of the potential tools and what we are investing in and where we think the biggest challenges are. But what's really important to us is sustainability. I think it's easy enough for us to create a service, but how do we sustain it? And costs have been mentioned many times, but also cultural shifts. And I think Juan was mentioning earlier on that actually cultural barriers are most difficult to break. and actually what actions are we taking to do that. So starting with the very first thing, policy, like many, many other institutions, we had to respond to EPSRC's expectations. That was the big stick. You have to do it or something will happen. By the way, to be very fair about this, even now we don't know what that stick is that EPSRC talks about. So there's a stick. We actually don't know how that's being imposed or even looked at. The policy was initially approved in February of 2013. It was revised in 2015 to incorporate some new elements, especially ESRC expectations that were clarified in 2015. And it's going to be revised again in 2018, and I'll talk a bit about why we are revising it again. And it's basically Lancaster AC UK Library RDM policy. Right, so what are the key points in our policy? So first of all, responsibility lies with principal investigator. Great thing to add in a policy. In reality, absolutely, completely a mixture of everything at this time. But the essence here is that the buck stops with the principal investigator. It is their responsibility to ensure that data management is being done effectively for their project. Each project will have a data management plan. For those who actually really support data management plans, and I think Neil was mentioning and showing some statistics on that, actually, in reality, not every project will have a data management plan. As a minimum, research data directly associated with publication should be archived. That's fairly true, but if you're really supporting open science, you need to be beyond the minimum. And all research data is stored for a minimum of 10 years unless required otherwise. And that unless required otherwise is commercial reasons, exploitation of data in the first use, all the other caveats that go with that. So those are the key points. The reason it needs to be revised a bit is because we want to add the impact of GDPR in there. Very specific kind of impact is coming along those lines, especially the biometric restrictions that are coming through. A lot of qualitative data, video interviews, you can actually now use someone's face from an image and actually create a facial model to unlock their iPhones. Or there are new headphones coming in which will only play music if they can recognize your ear canal structure. It's completely changing on what's considered biometric or personal data or all those kind of things. And actually, there's a lot that we need to look at in that way. We really want to actually question ourselves whether really each project needs to have a DMP, because it's a really, really good practice. But actually, for a very tiny project that someone is doing for a very small thing, do we really need to make them go through the whole process? And we have created a mini DMP for them, but still, I think there's a question there. We do want to add something specific for PhD students. The amount of questions we get from PhD students is quite substantial. And also the IPR policies, and you might also recognize this, the IPR policies for what staff produces versus what a student produces could vary quite significantly within the same institution. So Lancaster, for example, everything that's produced at Lancaster was owned by the university, and then a mutually exclusive copyright is given to non-exclusive copyright is given to the academic for that. But for anything that student produces, they own the data. So actually, can we even publish it in the first place unless they actually explicitly tell us that we are allowed to? And also attitudes. Recently, I was saying that earlier to someone on lunch that we've been doing this for over 3 years now, specifically done lots and lots of sessions with PhD students. But just about a day or two ago, we got an email from a PhD student. Oh yeah, I attended your session, I produced all this data, qualitative interviews data, sound recordings, everything. How the hell do I get rid of all of this? And actually for them, research data management is getting rid of things rather than actually using them for a long, long period of time. And I think that culture change still needs to happen. And something I recently observed that even though the library's been leading on the policy, actually library's never mentioned in the policy. It's all about research support office. So actually we need to revise and say where the roles and responsibilities lie and clarify that in the policy. So that was the kind of policy landscape. Once the policy was created, the next step was how do we govern this policy and how do we implement this and how do we move on in those structures? So immediate question was who's going to do this? Where are we going to get the staffing for? And I do have to say a big thank you to RC UK for introducing their expectations, because that immediately put some pressure on our institution. We are heavily funded by RC UK. About 70% of all of our funding is RC UK. And what we want to know is we ought to comply with it. Therefore, let's do something about it. So we managed to hire one research data manager and one digital archivist at the same time. So we didn't really have to make massive cases for that. Thank you to EPSRC clause number 9 about digital preservation as well. Since then, we've also added one new member in the team, which is Research and Scholarly Communications Manager, because of course open access has grown a lot and we need someone to actually manage the whole operation, and research analytics and academic impact as well. So once we have staffing in place, how do we use that staffing to do advocacy then? So initially, like many other institutions, we said, let's use the stick. Let's use our Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, who, by the way, at Lancaster was extremely plugged in, which was really, really beneficial for us, and say, can you send a message out to all PIs and all the academic staff and say, this is a new clause, you have to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And we saw really good growth at that time. And then about a month later, a very strong decline again. And then whenever the PVC sent another email, another growth spurt, and about a month or two later, it declined again. So it's good, but it's temporary. We then created a steering group called Roadmap Steering Group. Now, I'm very proud of this particular acronym because Roadmap stands for Research, Open Access, Data Management, and Pure. So it's actually a lot more exciting for people to know what Roadmap is. And the idea was to bring cross-collaboration in there. So we had IT services, library, research services, all the 4 associate deans for research from all of our faculties, and very extremely collaborative process to begin with. The differences do kick in. So what's important to Faculty of Health and Medicine has nothing to do with arts and humanities, although those boundaries are kind of going away now slowly. We provided a lot of central trainings to begin with, not very successful ones, in my opinion. Sometimes people will show, sometimes they won't. We sometimes forced on them. We had a huge recruitment staff, academic staff campaign, 50 for 50, and it was forced upon them that one of the essential trainings they have to do is research data management on open access. So there were sessions where we had a huge number of staff, but it was non-sustainable engagement, purely because it's being done through a forced mechanism rather than through interest. We also did surgeries and individual support. Individual support worked really well. We went to departments, created surgeries, and barely anyone came to them. I think our most successful surgery was 2 people. So I think, again, we experimented a lot. The kind of reason why I'm saying this is, actually we tried a lot before we realized what actually worked well at Lancaster specifically. So the lessons that we've learned is, one, top-down approach is effective, but it's temporary, at Lancaster at least. If engaged, research directors in each department can really play a crucial role, but the engagement part is absolutely critical. They need to understand what it is that we are asking of them and what the funding councils are actually asking of them. And even just getting research directors to understand that in the first place was quite a big deal. I've already mentioned research data as a central training is actually a boring topic. Why would anyone want to come and talk about research data management when they're busy doing really exciting research? And peer progression, so academics kind of forcing or teaching other academics on how to use effective practices, do work, but it takes a long time and will only work if you have a lot of engaged staff. If you have only 2 or 3 data champions in some places across the university, it will take you almost a decade plus to actually convince everyone to come on board. So again, data champions is a very good model, but at scale, not in a few departments or in a small number. Right, the other thing we've learned is actually no one approach works. We have to continuously mix them. So there are times when we use the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and say, yeah, let's go on the top down. There are times when we actually really push email agenda. There are times when we really go and talk to each individual, central trainings, departmental trainings. And then there are times when we try all of them, basically. So it's a mix-up of approaches that works. So we looked at data champions, we looked at data stewards, we looked at lots of other models that other universities have adopted. But after looking at that, looking at Lancaster's culture, looking at the researchers at Lancaster, we thought that what would really work well for us is if we make it about their research and not about their research data. So that was the crucial thing that we learned over time, that researchers would absolutely go out of their way to come and talk about their research because they're passionate about it. And that's the right channel to inject yourselves in and start slowly convincing them of how you can manage data also more effectively. And we introduced a new kind of series of events called Lancaster Data Conversations. Now, it's very informal. In fact, the last tip is the most important: offer them free food. that really, really works. Especially pizza was super popular. And what really happened, in fact, we weren't even expecting that, is we launched it as a research outcome for interdisciplinary research. We said, come and talk about your research and help others learn from what you've done. And in the very first event, there was someone from an energy department talking about their data visualizations of energy that they've done all over Lancaster, and someone from sociology who was saying, we do a lot of data analysis but don't have the skills to do these kind of visualizations. How can we do that? And they started talking to each other. All we did was just sit in the back and say, how did you manage your data when you were doing that? Did you actually store it in a USB disk, or did you use the central storage facility? And just handed them a few leaflets, some other things, slowly inject ourselves not to overburden them with research data. And actually, without even any further advocacy now, it's more and more and more popular every time. We've just done the 4th event now. I'll talk a bit more about data conversations going forward. Right. Now, tools. So developing a policy is the first step. Creating advocacy is the next step. But then people will come and say, how do I do this? What is the facility for me to do this? And back in 2015, we had to make a tough decision because at that time, there weren't really many good research data repository software. I think Figshare we evaluated at that time, and we looked at a couple of others. We looked at Hydra at that time as well, and decided that at the expense of cost versus benefit, it's probably just useful for us to use Pure for this purpose. And one of the biggest reasons for that was that it's a familiar interface. So academics will not have to learn completely new thing. They'll just get used to it. But we always knew that Pure will eventually creak. And that's because it's not developed as it's a research information management system. It's not really a research data management system. And Elsevier themselves acknowledged that, and therefore they've developed their own research data software as well, in addition to Pure. We also realized some limitations straight away. OK, we definitely want to use Pure back in 2015, but actually Pure can't mint DOIs. Pure can't do this, Pure can't do that. The interoperability is really problematic, et cetera, et cetera. So what can we do? So we took a 2-tier approach. One, let's get the problems resolved as quickly as possible. So again, the joint digital and research team meant we used the digital team to develop something called Mint, which is our own DOI minting tool. And then we also started working with Elsevier through the Pure user group to actually get their interoperability right. So massive API changes have happened since then. So what was the problem? The problem was that Pure did not have the capability to mint DOIs. And when that capability was developed, it was developed with the minimal data site metadata compliance as well. So these 5 fields at that time, I think there are 6 now, just those will be pushed. If you're pushing data, and again, Juan mentioned that it needs to be accessible, but also accessible. If it's not accessible in the first place because people can't reach it, then it's going to be a difficult thing. We really want to push our metadata out there. Also, you can't reserve DOIs through Pure. You can only mint them, but can't reserve them. And also, you can't actually mint DOIs for anything else other than research data. You can't mint DOIs for thesis or anything else, and we really want that capacity as well. So the solution we went for is we developed something called Mint. It's open source, by the way, all on our GitHub as well. Someone very aptly chose a very bad-looking mint color for that as well. The idea about Mint is that it's literally a direct linkage with Pure. So instead of someone actually adding all those metadata elements, they've already done it in Pure. They don't need to think about it. Just copy and paste the Pure ID. We will automatically extract that data out of Pure and automatically mint the DOI and data site, and automatically update the metadata whenever we need to. We can also reserve DOIs. We can also search on DOIs, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an example of a Pure ID added, minted DOIs, picked up the data. It's asking whether you want to mint it or you want to reserve it. It's as simple. It's boring looking, but the whole point is simple. It's the most simplest software that you can see out there. And similarly, if you want to search on it, you can actually see. In fact, we've just reached our 200th data set, so there must be some Twitter party going on. And you can actually see that you can update the URL. One of the most difficult things is if your research software changes and you want to update the URL on where the DOI should point to, you currently have to go to data sites metadata and update it there. You can just do it straight from here, just push it and update it. So it's really been useful. And of course, we've done theses, we've done data sets, and we can use our own prefixes and suffixes as well. We don't have to have a UUID-based DOI either. Right. When 2016 kicked in, we realized that Pure's limitations are starting to show now. So initially, we had the long tail of data. We had here's an Excel file, can you store it for me? Here's a small zip file, can you store it for me? Then came bioinformatics and physics. And we had a single file, which was about, I think, 80 gig, and then overall data set size was 300 gig or something like that. And that's just not going to happen through Pure. So we have this hard disk that we called data caddy, I think. And if someone will actually have to take it to them, copy the data, bring it back, and then upload it slowly in the background. It's just a terrible process. So also preservation became a key requirement. So we are now not just looking at research data preservation, but we're looking at institutional memories preservation. All the things that Valerie and others mentioned about records management and the council and Senate papers and everything else that goes on. So we were really looking for a solution, and we've looked at Jisc Research Data Shared Service, which was just emerging at that time. And very glad that it was happening and it's emerged in the way that it has. So we became an early pilot for that. We looked at all three slots, basically the repository lot, the preservation lot, and the reporting lot. Over time, we decided that we are also really interested in research analytics, so we started working on DMA Online, and I'll talk a bit more about DMA Online going forward, about how, in a complicated landscape, you can have a bird's eye view of everything that's happening. I think that's the whole purpose behind the whole of the software. We also want to shape up products. Now, one thing that's happened with Jisc's Research Data Shared Service is lots of products have come on board, and they've started learning how they can interoperate with each other. But they were all existing products. There was this Ex Libris, the library systems company, wanted to develop a brand new product. And we said, this is also a golden opportunity for us to not just add a new product to that, but also shape a product in a way that it satisfies the UK requirements. So we also said, we'll help you develop that product in a way that it really satisfies the UK needs. So us and Sheffield are the only two UK development partners for that as well. The product is called Esploro. Right, so then came another problem, which is what led to DMA Online, which is RDM is a complex domain, and anyone who says it's not is lying. I'll be very honest about it. If you've not been convinced by the data model that John showed you, then there's no other thing I can say on top of that. It's really difficult to see administrative data about all of these things. And actually, if I randomly ask you to think about something, how many systems are there in your institution to support data management? The default number would be somewhere around 5. In some of your cases, it would be 3 to 4. In some cases, it would be 7 to 8. Actually, if you really want to know what's happening overall, how do you get to know that? It's really difficult to do that with multiple ownerships across all over the place. And at different levels as well. If you are a research data manager, you want to see everything in detail. If you are Vice Chancellor for Research or Director of IT, you just want to know what's relevant to you. You don't want to see everything else. So we decided that we'll develop a reporting tool called Data Management Administration Online. Now, this is a slightly revised version because now we are part of RDSS. We are working exactly to the standards that RDSS wants us to do, which is the messaging-based system. So the Jisc Research Data Shared Service is the underpinning element to this, with the messages and events queue on top, which we will then ingest into our own engine, and using that to create a dashboard, an initial dashboard for reporting. But if you don't want to use another product, you already have a business intelligence suite at your university, like Tableau or ClickView or anything else. You can just use an endpoint to grab that data in there. So that's the very simplest way of saying it. What does it look like? Possibly something like this. Again, this will slightly change. What it does is it gives you kind of a top-level filter on what date range you want to see, which faculty you want to see, and actually just having university structure in there is so complicated for every university is different. Birmingham will have schools, Lancaster will have faculties and departments, then you'll have research institutes, then you'll have research centers, then some will have research groups. Oh, nightmare. Anyway, and then what we are trying to say is how many data sets have been created by that institution or by that subunit? How many of them were RC UK funded? So you can straight away look at RC UK compliance. How many were associated with DMPs? How many did not have a DMP? What kind of storage requirements are there? So we're looking at whether we can extract the storage requirement straight out from a data management plan and into the requirement queue over here. So if you said, oh, as a researcher, I think this project will take 200 terabytes of data, then it can automatically calculate the cost for you in the background and say, this is the predicted cost for this. Are you actually prepared to pay this or add it to your grant application or something like that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the top level. If you want to have a detailed view, you can actually go at each project level. You can see which faculty that project is from, which department, who's the lead PI, what's the expected cost, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we had to revise our architecture with Jisc RDSS, and I want to show you this extremely well-crafted diagram that one of my colleagues has sent me. This is the most recent version of our architecture, which is now based on Jisc RDSS. So I think we do lack these very, very significant and beautiful graphic skills that other parties have already used and shown. But actually, what it is saying is that everything is message-based. We'll use it. We'll have our own authorization service on it. We'll have third-party authorization, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we are not just using the APIs. We are also trying to see whether we can do graphical representations through GraphQL and other ways as well. Right, moving on. So something that's really core to my heart personally is sustainability. So you've developed a service, you've done advocacy, you've developed tools, people start using it. And then comes the question of, oh my gosh, everyone's using it. Or 50% of our academics have started using it. How do we sustain it with the small number of people we have? And we've done an analysis in Lancaster, and we know in our current form, if the growth rate continues, it will be non-sustainable for us. We just cannot manage it in the long run. We need to really embed that cultural change now. And Lancaster data conversations really are a key enabler for that. Because now what's happening is we are taking a backseat, and academics are coming from different faculties, talking to other academics, saying why they should be doing it, rather than us saying that. We also want to embed really core open science activities in departments, and one of the examples of that is Prosper, which is in promoting open science practices, which is an informal group in our psychology department, grassroots movement through departments. I've been pushing the School of Computing and Communications to do something similar as well. So the more grassroots organizations and departments start looking at this, the better overall sustainability of the service becomes. So Lancaster data conversations I've already mentioned, but I just want to point out a couple of links. We have a blog called Highly Relevant, which talks about all the research news that comes from Lancaster. So all of Lancaster data conversations, including all of the presentations, are available there, as well as data interviews. So we do data interviews with people on different topics and talk about why it's important to them. So you can actually use that information in your own organization and say, other researchers in this field talk about these reasons, do they work with you? And that's across the domain. We don't focus on science or technology or medicine or arts and humanities or social sciences. It's across the domain. Something really interesting came along. So for those who actually do remote teaching or remote education, one of the most recent talks was about how do I convince people who are studying in different parts of the world why RDM is important? And that was really an interesting way for us to think, actually, RDM is not just about what we can do sitting here, but actually how do we communicate it globally now. I've mentioned promoting open science practice. They were so passionate about it, they've created their own mugs about it, actually, which is really good. But they actually do these things as a principle. They do registered reports, but they actually do lab replication projects for other parties. So if they've looked at some other institution and there's a question about research integrity, they'll actually do a lab replication project for them. So I think these are really good practices that are coming, and goes back to accessibility rather than accessibility. Of course, accessibility is important as well. Study pre-registrations to see interest and other things, and of course, open access and open data in general. Right, another thing I really want to say, when we were developing a library building, we just recently refurbished, people questioned, you're spending about 10 million pounds on this. Well, actually, students really use it. And we've learned over time that if you build it, they will come. The same principle exactly applies to research data. If you provide enough metadata, put it out there, people will use it. And this is an example from one of our researchers in psychology, Dr. Dermot Linnett, who talked about just randomly, this is way before any policies kicked in. Back in 2009, he published a data set as a journal article. then he developed further articles using the utility or demonstrating the utility of that data set. Then he, over time, because of that, the data set became larger, and he had no idea how else it was being used till he started looking at it more recently. And actually, it's been used in dozens of other studies, translated into 5 other languages. It's been applied to robotics and machine learning, used to identify markers of depression and Alzheimer's in writing, and actually is now used as a basis for further funding. Just because something was done back in 2009 as a good practice, no other reason. And I think that really shows you that if you just put it out there, people will find innovative uses of it. Right, another thing, I'm kind of very end of the presentation now. One thing we are also passionate about is showcasing our service. So a lot of time, it's about convincing people that you bring value to this domain. You bring value to them as a service. And one of the things we've done is we've implemented our internal systems in a way now that every time we deal with a research data inquiry or anything, we actually do, and someone said surveys could be quite daunting. Actually, service for us is quite good because it's a very simple survey. They only get one email saying, good, I'm satisfied, or bad, I'm not satisfied. That's the only thing they need to click on. But it actually uses customer satisfaction scores, which is quite commonly used in industry. In fact, you must have received an email from a broadband provider or somewhere saying, would you like to rate our service between 0 to 10 or something like that? It uses that methodology in the background. And if you notice this couple of things, you really need to be on top of the game if you really want to establish your value there. This is for the last 30 days, just for research data management. We've only received 13 inquiries, which is greater than last month. Of course, the last month was December, so not many inquiries coming in December. Our initial response time is 1.8 hours, but actually that's a decrease by 33%. So usually we respond as soon as we get an email within about 30 minutes or less. So that's the kind of standard we are setting for ourselves. If you get in touch with us, you want to immediately resolve your problem. The other thing we've said to our researchers is, it doesn't matter whether it's an IPR question, it's a copyright question, it's this, it's that. They don't have to worry about it. We will internally triangulate that for you and get a response as quickly as possible. And that's worked really effectively as well. And this side is the customer satisfaction. So far we are at 100%, and it hasn't gone bad. Fingers crossed. Right, so what are we looking at moving forward? So this is where the digital and research team kicks in together. So of course we need to look at GDPR, and it's probably going to be a bigger issue than we initially think it's going to be. We just don't know how big of an issue it would be, so we need to start looking at that impact now. Of course, implementation of research data shared service, so that's quite a big one for us, and DMA Online as part of that. Discovery and reuse of research data. So I think libraries are very good at this, by the way. We create massive collections and then don't do much with them. And I think there's a danger with research data there as well. We'll have lots of research data collected, but actually no one really using it. So in fact, Gartner in their 2016 hype cycle predicted that a 5-year target for them would be smart data discovery. It's not about data discovery through just standard metadata schemas or anything. It's about how you can smartly discover data through, in fact, I've mentioned that at the very end, machine learning and artificial intelligence and all those things. So the next thing that we really want to focus on is data citations. So it goes back to the credit part of it. What's the benefit that the researchers get? Software citations, I think John was talking about the software side of things with Software Sustainability Institute. So again, we are hooked into some of those conversations. Text and data mining, I think Neil was mentioning about text and data mining, so that's very important to us as well. But we really do want to get more into machine learning and linked data as well, because we believe data will no longer be beneficial on its own. It will be more beneficial when it's linked to other similar data sets. And how do you identify the similar data sets? We can't. We're not domain experts. Can machines do that? I think that's the question we really want to answer. So that's kind of our this year plus partly half of next year strategy. That was all I've wanted to say. I don't know whether I've taken enough time or not. I hope I have. We're happy to take any questions or anything along those lines, or unless, Sarah, you want a panel discussion or something.
Do it either way. If people have got questions now, then please go ahead. I've got a microphone here. I can pass it around, or we can. We've got a scheduled coffee break due sort of in 5 minutes, so we can go and refuel and think about what we would like to say, and then come back and have a sort of a larger and more in-depth discussion about all the things that we've heard today, which is tons. So it's, yeah, whichever people would prefer.
Yeah, I wouldn't come in between you and your caffeine dose.
A vote for caffeine. Yeah. Okay. So if I think who's got a program in front of them? Back at 15:40 for discussions. Bring questions. Thank you, Masood.
I need to give Paul Wheatley a clapperboard so that he can take one. So we have, towards the end now, we've got half an hour, 40 minutes or so to just reflect on what we've heard today and to, well, partly to put the presenters on the spot and ask lots more questions, but also for the presenters, frankly, to turn tables and to ask questions of the audience, which always seems to me a fair thing to do. And I've also got a couple of questions which received kind of electronically for discussion. There's never been a DPC event, gosh, I'm awfully loud. There's never been a DPC event where it's been bad to finish early, though. So if folks, you know, we'll go as long as the energy in the room permits. So maybe I could invite questions from the floor rather than me dominating proceedings by leading off. So who would like to go? Who'd like to go first? Matthew Addis at the front. Oh yes, we should stick to the microphones as usual. Oh, you've got one, good.
Upon something that John presented, but also Masood talked about, right? So when John presented the rather abysmal user experience ratings for Archive Matter Preservica, it sort of, it highlighted, I think, there's a gap between what state-of-the-art digital preservation systems can do and what they actually need to deliver to be useful and functional within research data management. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Preservica and Archive Matica, they've undergone man-years of development in collaboration and partnership with big memory institutions. They've got hundreds of institutions using them worldwide, right? They are state-of-the-art solutions to digital preservation, and they do a very good job at that. But they're geared at very skilled specialist people in digital preservation. And when Masood was talking about the people that you've got at Lancaster, that's typical of many higher education institutions. There's maybe one or two people, and they're not digital preservation experts. So there's a gap there. So how big is that gap, and what are the main things that you would like to see to close that gap?
I think it's all about what's now considered normal. From my perspective, whenever we are thinking about developing new digital services, we say, who are we developing it for? It's for people who use things like Amazon and other interfaces on a daily basis. And we still are in a community where people are very hesitant to even make minor changes to things because they think it will have impact massively. I think people are getting used to it now. From my perspective, if I look at Preservica or Archive Matica, as long as you have someone who's specialist knowledge about them, they can really go through that system, and it's a great system for them. But when it comes to actually encouraging researchers to do submissions for packages, and when you look at the interfaces for those kind of activities, it's horrifying even to digital archivists, let alone the researchers. There's also a tendency to ask for everything you can ask for, rather than ask for what's core at that time, and then ask for more if it's really needed. And I think those principles will need to be incorporated into the way the more modern world works now, rather than the desktop kind of applications that people were used to back in the 90s. I think there's also, sorry, I'm not discriminating against people who used to do this. I was one of them, by the way. The other thing that I think goes also hand in hand with this is an element of digital literacy. It's not just about how you use the system or how the system can be made as intuitive as possible. But it's also about what you can do in terms of real benefit from that system. And is it a transferable skill? I think in an ideal world, for example, in my perspective, if you're a user of another system and you come to a digital preservation system, you say, oh yeah, I know how to use another system, therefore I have transferable skills and I can start using this system in the same way. I think that would be a great kind of ambition to reach towards. What really happens is someone comes from another digital system, have to go through a multitude of trainings and really, really in-depth knowledge of an Archive-Matica system or a Preservica system, and only then they are capable of using that. I think it's that gap we really need to shrink, at least in my perspective.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something. So those UX results, very small sample size. We're going to be doing loads more work on it with our UX consultancy, Acasta, and kind of with Tom as well. But just to kind of give folks confidence, with RDSS, we didn't just go and pick random systems. We went out and did a massive, laborious, very, very long procurement exercise, OG tender, and basically, yeah, got best of breed systems through that. And yeah, the two that got through to work with us on RDSS were Archive and Artifactual developing Archive-Matica and Preservica. But yeah, we found obviously that there is knowledge gaps. Masood, I think your team, you've probably got more resource to throw at it than most. So we have kind of use cases where there's, I don't know, someone has responsibility to look at digital preservation, but it's like, I don't know, half a day of their week or something like that. They can't get involved too much in the kind of nitty-gritty. So we need to make it as easy as possible for them to interact with the systems. Plus, researchers don't need to know about any of this. They just need to put the data in. All this other stuff happens behind the scenes. And yeah, they just got to be assured that it's getting looked after and they're policy compliant, basically. So you might not like that, but
can I sort of briefly challenge that? I mean,
okay.
Conventionally is, yes, it's the research data manager in the library who deals with the preservation system and does preservation on behalf of the researchers. Is there a case that preservation should be transformed into a toolkit for FAIR, right? So helping researchers do findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable data, and move the problem entirely to the researchers and cast it in as a thing that helps them do research, as Masood said earlier.
Not with the systems the way they are right now.
That sounds like the kind of thing that Juan might want to contribute to.
No, I go in the opposite direction. I think, like I said, I think the systems have to be invisible to the researcher. They just have to do their research in the way they want to do their research, and the rest of it should be happening in the background. Now, somebody somewhere has to do a lot of work to make that work. So there is a research data manager in the background, but that needs to be done on a one-off case, so that the environment the researcher is using is sufficiently connected to all the other systems so that the preservation happens automatically. Otherwise, it's just a great onerous extra task for the researcher. And even if that's all we can do now, it shouldn't be what we're aiming at, because we want the researchers to do research, so we should aim at having the thing invisible.
Valerie, you were nodding vigorously.
Yeah, could I just add to that, that some of this software, I find the terminology is very specific and specialist, and back to a comment that William made right at the beginning of the day about using language that people understand, I think there's a bit of work we can do there to try and agree common language so that everybody can understand what we're talking about.
Yes, I think I would echo that, and also just the usability of both Preservica and Archive-Matica. You do have to have a fair amount of knowledge before you can interact with these systems, and not every digital archivist, even if they're working in that field, they're quite often looking at the incoming data, trying to kind of decide whether they want to bring in collections or not. There's a lot going on, and to then have that really specialist and sometimes quite technical knowledge in order to make the system do exactly what they need it to do takes an awful lot of time. And when you've only got one person as your resource, which I think a lot of institutions have, or even less, then that's a huge time overhead just sunk in getting the system to do what you need it to do. So I think that usability factor does need to come to the fore a bit more.
I'm thinking maybe I could put someone else on the spot and come back to you, Masood, in a moment, but thinking about the user interface part of this, and I wonder if see if we can get Sharon, or provoke Sharon on this one, because, so thinking about the user interface part, right, so there's a training issue. There's fundamentally a training issue. If users aren't, it can sometimes be the interface, it can sometimes be the user, and you can train both, Now, in the world of digital preservation, we've taken a very generic view of training. Training has always been in the components, the standards, the processes, the policies, organizational structures, other components. But to be honest, we've never really looked at interfaces. We've never really looked at system implementation. And I think there's a good reason for that, because actually, for long enough, there's not really been much in the way of systems to implement. So you might get some interaction with, I don't know, you might use Droid or something like that as an exemplar, but there's not much in the way, historically speaking, that you could do in that context. And I kind of maybe throw it over to Sharon if you want to kind of speculate. Is there a need to evolve digital preservation training to meet the question from the other end to some extent? And the answer might be no. So I
think the answer is yes and no. So we hear a lot of very different stories from the people who come in training courses and kind of more broadly from people that we speak to. So part of it all depends on what the relationship the archivists or information managers have with the IT section or kind of group within the organisation they work for. If it is a good relationship and the IT staff are willing to really engage with digital preservation, then things are fine. They might need to upscale a little bit in more technical stuff, but not massively. But particularly for smaller organisations we come across, they're quite a lot of the time IT is outsourced or it's a completely different part of the organisation and they've got no relationship whatsoever. And particularly for people coming from kind of an archives background, they really don't have a lot of kind of technical or computer skills. And they're really kind of hungry to get more of those. That is something I've been thinking about whether we want to start doing a kind of basic tech course for kind of people coming from that area. And it's just simple things like how to use a command line or how to kind of install kind of open source software. And we've done a little bit of developing training on that this year for the Power project in the States, which is a really great project that's looking to enable small kind of marginalized organizations to be able to do digital preservation. So we've got a basis to build that on, but it is something I think there is a desire for out there.
Well, maybe there's a training package sort of somewhere in the mix here that could be useful. I can see a couple of hands going up, so.
Hi, John Baker from Digital Art. I was just going to say, like, we work with a lot of different sectors, and this sector in particular, as a whole, is very poorly serviced in terms of usable software compared to other sectors. It's not just preservation; it's journal publishing. It's the whole research sector. Yeah, so I think that's a more user-centric approach to the way that the software is developed is the key. You know, because you might need training on top of that, but you don't really want to start compensating for those or putting up with that because other sectors don't.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's partly because of the procurement process of having a massive shopping list of intenders to try and just having engineers trying to fulfill those features, not really thinking about it in that kind of way. And that's been historically how a lot of software has been developed in the sector. And that's why you're in the situation that you're in.
So Sharon looks like she's itching to come back, and then Masood had a comment. So Sharon first.
I was just going to say again that I would definitely agree with that. Like even simple things like characterization tools, we come across a lot of people who are using Droid because it has a graphical user interface, and therefore they can use it. But they are really scared of deploying anything else because it requires kind of command line use or kind of more technical skills to actually be able to implement. And even the kind of like the bigger open source stuff tends to require a little bit more kind of technical skills to be able to run it. I'm interested in anybody here who's used Haiku yet. The kind of meant to be the out of the box version of Samvera or previously Hydra. Yes.
Not much, but just I think they're abandoning Haiku. I think they decided it's not so easy to do.
I know co-sector at the University of London had been looking at it, but I hadn't actually heard yet about how they were finding it.
Well, that saves me from the trouble of having to try and write a haiku about user interfaces, which was going to be like torturing me for the next couple of months. Masood, you wanted to come back in and I cut you off.
No, I just have very minor comments, just two of them. Very one is on the lines of if we are looking at changing the training packages so we can train people on command line, it has to be a very, very temporary measure because what it's actually showing is there's a massive deficiency in the system that people actually have to learn command line to use it. So it could be a temporary solution, but it can't be the long-term solution by any means. The comment I wanted to make, just to add to Juan's point before, there's a difference between researchers knowing about digital preservation systems and knowing about digital preservation. I think researchers ought to know about digital preservation. It doesn't have to be in line with research data. And I'll give a nod to our digital archivist, Rachel McGregor. When we were developing our plan for the next year, we said, what can we use to introduce digital preservation that would be at least a bit more exciting than you should do it for research data? And for those who don't know, Lancaster was quite badly hit by floods back in 2015 in December time. And a lot of people's houses were flooded, they lost their data. So he said, can we not introduce digital preservation for your personal home items? Let's start there. And actually, once it starts getting embedded into their thinking of why we should embrace digital preservation, they will automatically ask that for, if I'm depositing this research data, is it going to be preserved for a long period of time? They definitely don't need to know how it's done, but they need to have at least a base level knowledge of some things being done.
So can I ask a question which we, Mrs. Trellis of North Wales has has written. Sorry, no, it's not. It's who is it from? Paul Jeffries, who's at the Imperial Cancer Research Fund. He emailed the following: are you aware of an institute that has found a way to manage research data from creation to long-term archive, enabling it to be findable, reusable, and combinable? A service like iRods is capable of providing the metadata management required, but it requires considerable investment, and we are looking for a simpler and more intuitive way to do this. Jam tomorrow, anyone?
Yeah, well, quite. You probably know more than me, but I can't see one, to be honest with you. iRods seems to me like it's a bit of a beast. I mean, you guys are heavily into it. UCL are using it, but they're looking at kind of other things, I think, for their next steps. But yeah, kind of people just want simpler solutions, I think, is what it is. Yeah, anyone know any examples? Would be good to know.
Anyone taking data directly from some sort of sensor or some sort of device and then being able to manage it directly into
box integration
to archives?
I don't think it will be answering the question, but I think we have stage one to some degree sorted, and it is literally to some degree, which is people can ingest data straight into box, which we can then harvest out. The issue there is, though, it only covers a minority. We don't use electronic lab notebooks. We don't have direct sensor data input into our box interfaces yet. But that's only one small pathway that's trying to answer that question. I think iRods is a beast from what I know of, and I think the only place I do know is UCL and possibly one other place who uses it. Yeah, but I don't know much about it.
I think Liverpool as well, maybe.
Yeah, we've used iRods. It is very powerful, but it is a lot of work to set it up. But then we're used to a lot of work because all our systems are bespoke.
It's just like that. It's just like that.
I don't know something off the shelf that does that, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because there is a big market out there now, I think, in institutions.
I mean, John, isn't that? Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it be lovely? And is that something that Isn't that where those diagrams ought to end up, or in some sense?
That's the vision. Yeah. We're in pilot stage at the moment. We're going to go to the transition to service. We've got a lot of work to do around business model and pricing and how we get all of this stuff done. When you're talking about iRods and kind of that type of data, it's big expensive and big stuff.
Yeah.
So we haven't quite got our heads around that. Paul's going to kill me because in our business model, he started talking in petabytes, and I was like, no, let's just get down into the gigabytes and terabytes. So yeah, kind of we've got to revisit that, I think, for the next. Things will happen, kind of incremental development. We're agile, so
Paul,
as a supplemental to that question, I wonder which part of that wish list that the panel think is the hardest to achieve?
So the wish list is, just to give it back, so it's findable, reusable, and combinable. Is that? So findable, what was it? I've even forgotten already. Findable, reusable, and combinable.
Reusable and combinable to me at the moment. Yeah.
If you
so
were
the
to
words I've used before are reuse versus repurpose. So reuse where it's do the same thing again with it. Maybe rerun the same analysis that was done first time is the simplest. Then rerun the similar analysis in the same field to test a different hypothesis in the same field is kind of reuse. Whereas repurposing, which is more like the combinable, is certainly the hardest because you've got to worry about the semantics of every field in the data and what they really meant. That's a whole new game over the other two.
In your sector with the reuse, if you change your compute, you get a different result, don't you?
You can.
Yeah.
You can. That's
okay. Okay.
And that's measurable.
Okay,
you can
good.
tell if it's that.
All right.
It's not.
Getting different results was never a problem.
It's not new.
I'm going to kind of maybe move on to kind of, what I guess, a final discussion question for the panel, and again for you all. And it's really, maybe it is more for the audience than the panel. It started today by saying research data management is a thing. It's had a lot of investment. It's going, depending how you view it, it's going very well, very slowly, very ambitiously, very creatively. There's all sorts of things happening in the research data management space. And we've seen not just the research data shared service, but that's probably the flagship here, of a variety of other initiatives and activities which are, you know, for the common good, making open access, making open data, and coming back to that. And I wish I had written it down, Juan, the quotation from Einstein that, you know, encapsulates what we think is good practice here. So this is all good. And the question is for, you know, what does this mean for people who are not interested in research data management, shocking though that may sound? Is there something here that other parts of the institution can take from this? If there is, what is it?
Right. So, a few things. On my title slide of the presentation, it said, RDSS, we need a new name. So our business model is now based around basically kind of dealing with more or less any digital content that people can throw at us, because the systems should be able to manage that. When we go out and do institutional visits with our pilots, we have our kind of key contacts around RDM. We did a round in November and December. At more or less every visit, we just met loads and loads of new people who were like, oh yeah, we'd like to kind of, you know, preserve this. It's not research data. It's, you know, kind of AV that's been created over the years. It's, kind of university archives, records, and things like that, which is why we've brought Valerie on board, the University of Westminster, yourselves, SSI, stuff like that. So, yeah, kind of, it's in scope. So, yeah, it's a big challenge. Yeah. I know there's a lot of work to do, but the focus and the money is on research data, and that's what we need to deliver first. Yes. But yeah, we can see the potential for others, and Valerie and Kirsty, you'll have more to say on this, I'm sure. So.
Well, actually, I think I've got a bit more of a sort of question coming back, because I think a lot of the sort of solutions used are open source, and I think my experience within the sort of museums, archives, and kind of cultural heritage sector is that there's a real reluctance to go down that open source route, and there's still a sort of nervousness because quite often these are smaller organisations with different IT setups, as sort of Sharon mentioned, so a kind of off-the-shelf solution that kind of gives you everything out the box is very attractive. So what are you as Jisc going to do to kind of really sell what you're developing here into other areas and sectors and make it much more attractive and therefore long-term viable?
Basically, web-based software as a service. And integrations with common systems. We're never going to get every integration done, so it will be kind of 80-20. But yeah, kind of that's the plan basically. So.
I'd just like to add to that, we like open source software, and quite a lot of the open source software we use is effectively just a package that you can take and use as it is. So we're quite big fans of that. And I think the important thing for me today is to work better together. I think we're doing quite a good job internally at our organisation of working regardless of our internal divisions. But I think some of this that we do as a community is maybe a bit ad hoc. We need to coordinate it a bit better to make better use of the taxpayers' money. And that's what I'd like to do.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I was surprised what you said about open source, because we do a lot of work in cultural heritage, and open source is typically a prerequisite, and there's a lot of suspicion around proprietary lock-in for systems. And the key thing is to have, you know, if it's a cloud service that's hosted anyway, then you have that benefit of having a company, or at least a good company that's supporting you, so that you know there's good community and professional companies that are behind the software. Then you get the best of both worlds, and I think that's kind of more common model now, especially in cultural heritage. We produce quite a lot of products ourselves, and they've all been open sourced because we didn't feel like they would be adopted otherwise. So, yeah, there seems to be a more open approach. It seems to be more popular.
And I guess as well as there's open source and open source. You know, there's open source which is genuinely, you know, download and do what you like with, but there's also aggregators, there's service providers, there's tools you can buy effectively as products which have their origins in some sense in open source. So it's a very diverse kind of category, really.
So the development work that we're doing with the open source communities in Jisc, so Archivematica, Preservica, others, Masood, all of that will get kind of pushed back up the code base if necessary, and hopefully we can support others as well in the future, but we can only do what we can do at the moment. So.
I'll just add something very briefly to that. I think there's a difference again between, as William mentioned, open source, which you can do and do whatever you want with it. And there is a genuine concern about long-term sustainability there. Who's going to support it? Is it going to be worth it? Do we need a development resource to do this? Is it actually going to cost us more than just buying it off the shelf? And considering that I work in an organization where we promote a lot of open source software, but we also buy a lot of proprietary software, I think we need to strike that balance on where it makes more sense to buy proprietary versus where it makes more sense to get open access. But just going to your point, if an organization is behind it, if it's supporting it and you can see the long-term sustainability through that, it's better than just going ahead and doing it completely yourself, unless you have the resources and means to do it. That would be my perspective on that.
Sorry. There's definitely a naivety and an idealism about open source, where a lot of organisations think, oh, we'll deliver this, then we'll open source it, and then they think that's the end of the story. But that's just the beginning, really. With open source software, it's that maintenance of the community and the sustainability is the key thing, and that's something that is neglected. It's right to be suspicious and to do the due diligence on any open source project in that sense, to see that is in place for sure. You know, because a lot of public sector organisations, they'll open source something thinking they're doing something for the public good, and they're just wasting money because they're not really going to follow up and make that a long-term success. You know, so.
Just like to say on the proprietary front, if we work together as a community for those kind of users that institutions that are buying proprietary software, gather together requirements, needs, roadmaps, things like that, as a kind of sector, we can, you know, kind of hopefully have more influence if we work together, bring things up onto kind of product roadmaps and things like that. And you know, you've kind of led that activity on the Pure User Group, Masood. We're doing the same thing with kind of sponsoring development with Preservica, kind of Yale in the States are kind of co-sponsoring some stuff with us as well. There's some activity with RNet in Australia as well that's about to start. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff we can do if we kind of approach the suppliers together.
That's a good message to end on, don't you think? That we all can work together on these and have solutions for the future. Let's end by thanking our speakers for their contributions and for a great and insightful day. Thank you very much. So as usual, 3 things on the way out. So firstly, to say evaluation forms. There are evaluation forms in the packs. They are a bit of a pain to do, I know, but they're incredibly useful. So please do pop an evaluation form. Just leave it on the table. We'll collect it on the way out. Second thing, as always, DPC never sleeps. So our next gathering on Wednesday, so less than a week, we're back down in London for email preservation. How hard can it be? 2, because it wasn't hard enough the first time. We had to do 2 workshops on it. It also coincides with the student conference, which also is a wonderfully titled Digital Preservation, What I Wish I Knew Before I Started. And both of them, I think, are now sold out. Although I think we put an extra couple of places in the email one by rearranging the furniture. So there's just time for you to get to the email one if you're inclined. That reminds me to say that this is part of a series, okay? This is the part 2 of a 4-part series. We're meeting again in London. I won't say it's a launch event, but a public event around. It's a launch event for the Research Data Shared Service. No. Well, we've got 2. We've got London.
Next one's March the 20th in London.
Yeah.
And the one in May is in Bristol, date to be confirmed.
And Bristol is in May. And that one's on policy and planning development to meet the technology development associated with what we've been looking at. So there is a very active programme of events and activities around the DPC. So to encourage you, if you're not already members of the coalition, it's a good opportunity to get involved. And I think we decided by Slack today that we're going to have our unconference in this room in June. So more details on that in due course. So that was the second thing. And the third thing is to say thank you very much for your time and have a safe journey home. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much.